real estate webinar where we do talk about topical issues every month. And this is the month of April, where we're going to be looking at a very topical issue that we'll be deliberating on. It's going to be starting right away. We want to thank you for joining, and we welcome you warmly. We want to ask you to try to tell your friends, invite other people to join in so that we can get the session going immediately. And so, like I said earlier on, this real estate webinar is organized by Uboseli & Co., where we discuss issues relating to real estate and other things that impact on real estate generally. And so a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Should you have, I'm going to introduce the speaker shortly, and we're going to start shortly, but should you have any question, you can use the chat box to drop in your questions so that we can look at your questions and be attended to. If also you would want to speak, and we will give a few persons the privilege to, also promote them to the panelists if they do have questions or comments, so that they can make one or two comments. So please feel free to let us know, and we're going to definitely get back to you. In recent time, not new lexicon, but again, basically the words demolition, violation, alleged violation, lack of approval, encroaching on government land had been the issue that we've seen in recent time. And so this morning, we're going to be speaking on the topic, legal and regulatory issues in real estate development, the need for compliance. I take that again, legal and regulatory issues in real estate development, the need for compliance. And so right about it immediately, I'm going to invite our speaker who is going to be speaking. Like I said earlier, please make sure, we want it very interactive, ask questions. If you want us to promote you to make comment, we'll be glad to do that. I'll be inviting our speaker, and no other person than our principal partner, the principal partner on Uboseli & Co., Mr. Chidi Ubosi, will be doing justice to this topic. So right about now, I'd like to invite Mr. Chidi to the floor to take on the floor immediately. Mr. Chidi, good afternoon. Are you ready?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar for the month of April. Like my colleague has just mentioned, the topic that we have this month is titled Legal and Regulatory Issues in Real Estate Development, the Need for Compliance. This topic has come because in recent months, there has been a rise in demolition of real estate in various states nationwide. In recent times, we're talking maybe even as far back as 6 months, there has been a major rush and rise of demolitions of real estate, starting from the Lagos, starting from the Lekki area, demolitions by the Ministry of Environment. Can we have the introductory slide, please? Demolitions by the Ministry of Environment, a lot that went on in the Lekki area. Then there were those in Festac, and then we even as far as Abuja, there were demolitions that went on, and parts of the places, 1 or 2 places in Oyo State too. And even talking about in the recent past, I know that currently and ongoing. Angela, can I have the introductory slide, please? I'm aware that currently there's a demolition. The properties are being demolished along the Odo, Iyalaro, and Ojota Ogudu Canal or Channel, all the way down to Ogba and so on, Olowora and so on. There's still demolitions ongoing, even as we hold this seminar or this webinar this morning. And, when we looked at it, we said, look, we needed to talk about this thing. This is a topic that we need to talk about and let the public understand why these things happen and how people can avoid them. There are usually many reasons why the government will embark on demolitions. Many of these reasons are legal. Many of these reasons are legal. Maybe you have gone and built on a property that you're not supposed to build upon. You have gone and built on a property that you're not supposed to build upon, or in other cases, these are infractions. There are infractions of planning and building regulations. So what is happening is that invariably, many times, lots of the victims are caught unawares and only become aware of any issues with their properties when they're served a demolition or contravention notice to remove their development. Many people are really not aware that they have contravened, either legally or by infracting on the building or planning regulations. Again, the other set of demolitions that have taken place, especially in Lagos, are those of distressed houses. Many of us are aware that with a lot of the collapsed buildings, that the rush of collapsed buildings that happened, the government marked a number of properties for demolition, and because of their distress and poor quality construction. So this is like an introduction, and I'm now going to go into the legal issues in property acquisition. We're going to talk about the legal issues and how these things can impact on the fact that in the future, your property might actually be threatened or might become subject of demolition after the development. It may even come in years after you have lived there. So I'm going to look at legal issues in property acquisition and development and how one can avoid getting into trouble with the planning authorities. The first thing that we would always say is, please acquire your land legally. Acquire your land legally. Obtain the necessary title documents. When you acquire the land, obtain the necessary title documents. A certificate of occupancy, or the governor's consent, or get your deed of assignment. And before the transaction is concluded, it's always advisable to take your survey plan and go in to the Ministry of Land and Survey and chart your chart. There's something they call chart, which is they will place your survey plan, they'll juxtapose it with the largest survey of the state or that neighborhood and determine whether your land, that particular property, is within an area that is up for acquisition, or it is an area that falls on a drainage channel, or it falls under high tension wires. People buy all kinds of properties, not out of the fact that they know. Most of it is done because they're deceived. Most of it is done because they are defrauded. In my years of practice, we've been in practice now over 3 decades. I've seen all kinds. I've seen survey plans, which by the time we have charted, fall right inside the drainage canal. I have seen that in places like Ogba. I have seen a survey plan that was, and not just the survey plan, the guy actually had been issued a CFO by somebody. When we charted the land, it was in the middle of the canal by Kilo in Sulere. So people get deceived not because they want to deliberately infract on the laws. No, sometimes these are honest mistakes on their part and they have been deceived by people who are supposed to guide them and direct them. And then we look at things like when you have a letter of allocation. Many people get a letter of allocation the government asks you to pay a certain amount of money, and then many assume that, okay, if I've been asked to pay 10 naira, once I pay 1 naira, the land is mine and I can go and begin to develop. No. When you have your letter of allocation, it's important that you pay up the full sum of money. That way, even the government knows and appreciates the fact that you have accepted the allocation and will begin to process your C of O. It's not always right to, no matter how much accessible that land may be, it's never your land until you have finished paying for it. What happens is that a lot of people make part payments, they abandon it, and then go away. And so then maybe after a few years, they actually go and start developing. And many times, by the time you go back to that property, because you did not make full payment, the government has assumes that you were not interested and has reallocated the land to somebody else. And then you get into a legal tussle over the ownership of the land. And invariably, maybe what you have built will now be threatened by demolition or something. So these are some of the legal issues in building real estate development and building. Again, many states will accept a purchase receipt. Some will accept a registered survey plan as adequate title. But the key thing is whatever it is that you have, make sure that there's some kind of recognition of your document by the state government. Now, the key topic that we're talking about today is regulatory, apart from the legal aspect of it, we're talking about regulatory issues in building and development. Can I have the next slide, please? Regulatory issues in building and development. The reason why we're talking about regulatory issues is because, again, like we have said, we're trying to educate ourselves to avoid issues where our development will be threatened by demolition or something like that during the process of construction or when it has been finished. The first thing, one of the first things that we must do when we want to go into building is to determine what that particular land is zoned for. One of the first things that we must do is determine what that particular land is zoned for. Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it mixed use? Is it for hospitality? If it's residential, what kind of residential is it? Is it 2 floors? Are you allowed to do 2 floors? Or are you allowed to go to 10 floors? Are you allowed to go to 20 floors? Every neighborhood has the zoning and the planning mix, so that when you go to seek so that when you are doing your design, you know exactly what to put there. In a particular case that we were involved in, somebody was given the neighborhood in which he was supposed to build. He weren't supposed to go more than 3 floors, and he was going to about 6 or 7 floors. It was actually the governor at that time, Governor Fashola, who stopped him. He was driving past that property one of those days, identified it, and stopped that construction. I think eventually the man had to knock away 2 floors. This is not this story I'm telling you is very true. I don't want to mention, once I mention the area, most people will know it. But the man had to knock away 2 floors before he was allowed to finish that property, because the governor immediately identified that, look, you are not supposed to go as high as this in this particular neighborhood. So it's always very important to determine what your neighborhood is zoned for, so that you don't end up suffering demolition. You cannot go and put up a hotel. You cannot decide to build a hotel in a strictly residential area. No matter how much you duck and dodge the planning authorities, one day it will catch up with you. The next thing that we talk about in terms of regulatory issues is using the right registered and qualified professionals to produce for you the necessary documents to enable you to approach the authorities for a development permit. Building drawings, structural, electrical, mechanical drawings, environmental impact analysis, your soil test, your land use planning report, your title documents, your tax documents, and so on, amongst others which may be asked for. These things are very, very key in terms of the right documents so that you can get a development permit. Many times people assume that a lot of these requests are just a waste of time. There's a reason why the government will ask you, for example, to produce a soil test or an environmental impact analysis. If you're building on a swampy land, it's important that you have a soil test. And we cannot speak too much, for example, on the significance of having a proper soil test done before you go into do your foundation. With the wrong foundation, your property will begin to suffer uneven settlement, even sometimes before you finish development. And what then happens is that a few years after, even the government will threaten to demolish your property. Many times, if you are using the wrong professionals, they will always tell you stories. Oh, don't worry, we have done this before. We can manage it. You don't need to spend so much money doing a pile foundation in an area that is swampy. So that's why we're emphasizing the use of the right professionals. The use of the right professionals is very key. And the environmental impact analysis, very, very key. Many times, a lot of us will cut corners by just easily copying something from some other person's report and putting a note. Every development is unique in its own way. I don't know how many of us remember now, there's the Northwest Petrol Station. The Northwest Petrol Station on Mobolaji Bank Anthony Way at Maryland, for those who are in Lagos. There used to be an event center there. There used to be an event center there. If we remember, there used to be an event center there. I can't remember the name now. But many of us remember that that event center operated for less than 1 month before the government shut it down. Because clearly the environmental impact analysis was not correct. That event center was such a nuisance that anytime there was an event there, the traffic it created from Maryland backed up to Ojota, K2, and so on in one direction, backed up on Mobolaji Bank Anthony Way, maybe to as far as Ikeja, and backed up on Ikorodu Road, right, maybe sometimes as far as Onipan and Jibo. So the government had no choice but to shut it down. Eventually, the man actually went out of business and sold the place. So those are some of the significant things about these documents that we submit. A proper environmental impact analysis would have highlighted these issues, and probably there would have been a different development on that land. So when in terms of these documents to be submitted, they are necessary. And when the authorities ask for them, they're just doing their regulatory work. And we are bound to give them, and we're bound to comply. When we do submit these documents, many times the regulatory authorities appraise them and are at liberty to return the drawings for amendments in areas. Your drawings can be returned. Next slide, please. Your drawing can be returned for setback infringement. Your drawings can be returned because they don't see enough ventilation. Your drawings can be returned for fire hazard. Your drawings can be returned for maybe the building is too big. lighting, and so on. There are many reasons why the government exercises this regulatory oversight and so on. You can't build on the setback because it's easy to understand there must be space for people and cars to drive on the road. You can't have a building, you can't have a residential house that has maybe just one singular exit. It's a fire hazard. You can't have a house where ventilation or lighting is poor. Again, I talk about, there was this house in Ikoyi, I think 3 or 4 years ago. There was a fire and the house help and 2 children of the owner, of the property owner, were on the top floor of that building, and there was a fire on the ground floor or the first floor. But they could not escape. The 3 of them died in that fire because the windows were too small. The windows were too small. So even when the fire people came and broke the windows, the children nor the maid could hardly squeeze in through the window to get out. And there was no upper balcony where they could go to and be taken to safety. So they sat there, the fire burnt the entire ground floor, came upstairs, and they all lost their lives. These are the reasons why many times when you go in, when you send in your drawings, there's a back and forth, It's not that the authorities are being difficult, it's purely a regulatory oversight. Provisional approvals will be given after payments have been made. And again, many developers assume that when they get these provisional approvals, that they can move to site. It's not really so. Many times, again, we say a provisional approval that tax payment has been accepted does not equate to a building permit nor approval. It's only that, yes, we have noted a few things. Once we'll keep correcting them and we'll keep pointing them out to you, you correct them and bring them back to us and so on. And so what we want to say is that until the final approval is given or obtained, it's dangerous to proceed with development because eventually this may end up leading to demolition of your development or even a sanctioning of the development. Let's go to the next stage, which is the construction stage. Let's go at the construction stage, which is the stage where the contractor moves to site. The Lagos state law states that there must be a contractor's board at the site. At every development site, there must be a contractor's board, visible to all, to show the professionals involved in the development and who are responsible for oversight over the development. This is necessary. I mean, it's not something that we should happen, but this is necessary because there are government agencies that have oversight on ongoing developments. And as soon as they come to your site, they want to be able to look at and see the names of the professionals who are there, their addresses, their phone numbers, so that as they inspect the property or go through it, if there are things that they need to point out, they can quickly make a call. One of those agencies is the Lagos State Building Control Agency, LATSCA, which a lot of us know, started operations in 2012. And their duties, which many people do not know. People think that their duty is just to come and mark properties and demolish or threaten to demolish. But their duties actually include building control in all its ramifications, approval to commence. They should be the LATSCA have to give you approval to commence construction even after obtaining your permit. And then also inspection and certification of various stages of construction. The graphic you see there, is actually from their website. And it will interest you to know that before, even after obtaining your planning permit, even after obtaining your priming permit, one of the regulatory requirements is that Lagos State Building Control should give you a letter permitting you to move to site. You know, they should give you a letter approval to commence construction after obtaining your permit. And then they have the right of oversight. At stages of your construction, they must come back. They should come back to you, to the development, to check what is going on and point out areas where they have challenges or areas where they think you should strengthen the building, or just generally have an oversight to make sure that your finished product or the finished development is fit for human habitation and also strong enough to stand the test of time. And then the other interesting thing is that when the building is finished, the same LASCA should issue a certificate of completion and fitness for habitation and use. You know, these are things that many of us, even people in the building industry, are not aware of. These are regulatory issues. And the infraction of some of these things could lead even to the demolition of your property, or these embarrassing red marks that we see on most properties, where they will go in there, they will write, stop work, and so on. Then the other agency of the Lagos State government is the Lagos State Material Testing Laboratory, formed in 2011. Next slide, please. The Lagos State Material Testing Laboratory. Their mandate is to curb the incidence of building collapse and civil engineering structures. And this was to be achieved by testing the materials to be used on site for quality assurance. Again, many of us do not know, because some of these agencies have also not been very dynamic and active. Next slide, Angela, please. They've not been very dynamic in their operation. So many people don't even know that there is this agency called the Lagos State Material Testing Laboratory with a mandate to ensure that buildings do not collapse. And one of the ways that they will do that is to check the quality of materials used and ensure that they meet the standards for that kind of construction. So the regulatory authorities have gone to very great lengths to set up agencies that will ensure that if developers and real estate developments comply with the laws, there will be very few unpleasant incidents pre and post construction. One of the things that you see a lot in practice is that a lot of there is this feeling that these agencies and their rules and regulations a problem, they're a bother, and there's bureaucracy, and generally just present an unpleasant disturbance. But the truth is that they are all working in the overall interest of everyone, the professionals, the developers, the end users, and even the larger society at large, the entire society at large. We are all aware of the buildings that have been collapsing and so on. And the other thing also is that very many people, professionals included, are not aware of these agencies and their roles. Even where we are aware, we're not entirely aware of the full roles that these agencies play in terms of regulating real estate developments. And that's where this issue of the fact that many are deceived, that they do not matter. People will come, no, look, we can bypass this one, we can always do something to cut corners, we will do this, we will do that. People go as far as obtaining fraudulent and fake building permits, and eventually run into trouble your fake permit or your approvals may carry you for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Someday, as is happening in recent times now, something happens, some of these things have to be checked, and then you find that you're sitting on the real estate that you have put so much money into has to be pulled down or destroyed because ab initio, it started off on a wrong footing. So there are also many ways in which developers cut corners and run foul of the regulations and authorities. And then in that way, they leave themselves open to all kinds of penalties and huge fines in some cases, and then in others, maybe even demolition of the properties, as we are seeing now. People encroach on setback areas. I talked about this thing about setback areas earlier. Setbacks are meant for your setback is actually not your property. It's part of the government property because there has to be provision for cars, there's provision for pedestrians, street lighting, and all kinds of things, drainages and so on. It's on these setbacks that some of these services and infrastructure are built. So you can imagine when people's homes or houses are sitting on setbacks and you cannot have a drainage, and then the heavy rains come. The next thing we're looking at may be floods. So there are people increase floor area of their buildings. You are asked to, you submit an approval. You are given an approval for 3 bedrooms. You keep that approved building plan on one side, and you move to side and start building something that is 5 bedrooms, contrary to the approval that you're given. Somewhere along the line, the government comes in to check what you're doing and then demolishes your house. People use substandard materials. I've talked about the Lagos State Material Testing Laboratory Agency. They come into your property and see that substandard materials are being used. And these materials will constitute a danger in the future. They are at liberty to actually knock down or demolish your building. Poor workmanship, blocked fire escapes, and so on. I've talked about the incident in Parkview a few years ago where 2 children and their household lost their lives. Now, we've gone through a lot in terms of talking about the legal and regulatory issues in real estate development. There's a need. I want to begin to round up. There is a need for compliance. There's a great need for compliance to save the destruction of properties and investments, both now and in the future. There's a great need for all of us to comply. A few weeks ago, even the Lagos state government the Lagos state governor made a statement saying that of about the 5 million developments in Lagos, less than 10% of them had building approvals. Less than 10% of the 5 million developments in Lagos had building approval. So you can see the wide disparity between what is on ground and possibly how much approval people have obtained and how many illegal developments are actually standing on property, on how much illegal real estate developments that have taken place in the state today. And, when we always talk about Lagos State is a forerunner for most of these states. So if Lagos State has a figure as abysmal as 10% building approvals, you can imagine what obtains in the other states of the Federation. I'm sure some other states will have figures as low as 1%, 2%. Compliance with building approval permits and so on. So there's a great need there is a great need for all of us. There's a great need for compliance, to follow due process when engaging in development. It's important that all building permits and clearances are obtained. On the legal side, it's important that you have legal title to the property. Or if you don't have legal title, get verifiable, equitable, or an equitable interest that is certifiable, is something that can be verified. Everybody knows that you are the owner. You have your purchase receipt. You have your survey plan that is registered with the relevant authorities, and it's important that at any point in time you are engaging with the relevant authorities when going into development. Engage with the relevant agencies. Engage with the relevant agencies. You cannot go wrong when you engage with the relevant agencies. Compliance, complying with those agencies means that in the future, even when the government needs to acquire one's property for right of way or some other project for the public good, the property owner will be entitled to adequate compensation. That's very key. That is very, very key. Because if you do not have a building approval or you do not have a verifiable title or legal interest in a property, and the government rightfully decides to acquire your property for the public good, maybe they're building a road or they want to put up a project, if you cannot submit any of those documents, you will not be entitled to any compensation. You would have a zero. It's a zero-sum game. It's a zero-sum game. So this is why complying with the legal and regulatory issues for real estate development is very key. And one cannot, again, overemphasize this. The Land Use Act gives all the governments, all the state governments power over every land. So they can take your land, but as long as you have title, as long as you have relevant documents to show that you built that property with the permit and approval of the same government, you'll be entitled to full compensation. Anything else, and it will be a zero-sum and big loss. So please, we need to keep re-emphasizing this. There's no property that cannot be acquired. There's no property that cannot be acquired or cannot suffer partial acquisition. But the key thing is to have your documents. It's one of the major reasons why there is a need for compliance. Of course, we'll talk about the need in complying. When you comply, it helps us live in an orderly society. It ensures that we all live in an orderly society. I cannot have my one-floor bungalow or two-floor house, and next to me is an 18-story building with 200 tenants in it, putting pressure on the services and so on. Again, when we talk about having an orderly society, provision of services and infrastructure, the government zones particular areas and say, look, in this particular area, we don't want more than 2 or 3 floor houses. It is because they are aware of the volume of services and infrastructure that has been put or will be put in that area to service that particular neighborhood. Anything going beyond what they have approved will begin to put pressure on the services and the infrastructure there. And that will then make it a lot easier for things to fail. That's why when you go to an area, they tell you the transformer is overloaded. I'm sure we as Nigerians are used to that kind of term. The transformer is overloaded. It's because the transformer is servicing more people than it ordinarily should have, because the number of houses that came in or the number of users are beyond what has already been planned for. Compliance, again, talks about having a safe and good environment. If we have, if people comply, we know who lives where, we know how many people live in that house, we know how many tenants are there. It talks, there's control, there's security, and so on. We cannot overemphasize the need for compliance. Compliance actually is the key to an orderly society, not just even in building or real estate development. Compliance is the key to an orderly society. If we all comply with the laws and regulations, every society will be orderly. As I begin to round up, as I begin to conclude, there's a need for compliance with legal and regulatory requirements for real estate developments, and it cannot be overemphasized. The peace of mind that comes with it is immeasurable. For long, many Nigerians have fallen victim to false assurances of fake officials and land speculators about how age-long projects have been forgotten or abandoned, and therefore the Omoniles or speculators then proceed to sell off or encroach on land along these corridors. These are corridors that may have been acquired long ago and earmarked for projects. But you know, because the government is usually very slow in taking some of these projects, 10, 15 years later, everybody thinks that the project is forgotten. The landowners go back to their land and begin to sell off the land to unsuspecting buyers, and they're convinced that, look, nothing will happen. And that's why when we started this webinar, I said, when you buy land, please go to the conclusion slide. When you buy land, please always take your survey plan to the land registry, to the survey office. It will be charted for you. It will be charted, and they will tell you exactly where and how your land falls in the scheme of things and development. And a very major example that comes to mind is the Fort Mainland Bridge Corridor. That Fort Mainland Bridge Corridor is a corridor that has been acquired almost a quarter of a century ago. Many people believe that the project would never see the light of day, but from all indications, that project is likely to take off within the next couple of months. And many of us are going to sit back and be surprised when we see the volume of developments that have gone on that corridor. 95% of them illegal, without building plans, without approved building plans, and so on. But as I actually round up, the major fulcrum of compliance is not only to employ the right professionals, but is also to take their advice regarding any real estate development project that one is getting involved in. It's not only to employ the right professionals, but it's important to also take their advice regarding any project that one is getting involved in. You know, I listed, I think in the second slide, when I talked about regulatory issues, the documents that are required before you move to sites. The Lagos Material Testing Laboratory come and look at your materials. The contractors board, the need to get building permits, the need to get proper title to your property, the need to get a certificate of completion and fit for habitation when the project is finished. These all sound like a lot, but if you have the right professionals working for you, these are basically things that they do in their offices on a daily basis and will deal with them for you and such that. But again, many Nigerians, as we are, we end up shooting ourselves in the foot. You want to do a project that will be one of the biggest things that you'll do in your lifetime. The expenditure is one of the most largest expenditure you will make in your lifetime. And we keep cutting corners, forgetting that someday a huge price could be paid for cutting those corners. That huge price could be the total loss of your real estate development by way of the government coming in, as we have seen recently, to demolish it and leaving you completely out in the open with no compensation, with nothing to show for your development other than the total loss of what you have spent. So please, as I round up, the key thing is for us to, when we're going into real estate development, let us sit back, look at the legal issues, look at the regulatory issues, and at every point in time, let us comply with them. We will all save, not only ourselves, we'll save our clients, and we'll save a lot of investment for now and in the future. Thank you very much for listening, and then we'll be open to comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chudi. Thank you for that that impactation. I mean, the way you went through the topic, and it was just something that I mean, I have my notes written down here, and I'm sure quite a whole lot of people also have one or two things that. And so before we begin to take, I've seen like 2 questions. And before we take those questions, let me also reiterate that if we have anyone who intends to make comments, you want to be promoted to probably say 1 or 2 things, we can give a few persons that privilege. So just do that by the show of hand on the chat box. Just do that. The back end will see how we can promote you, and I'll call you to make your comments, and then we can now take it off from there. Mr. Chudi, I want to, you've said so many things here, and I don't know if you want to zero in on 1 or 2 things based on, you mentioned the issue of the Port Milan, you talked about how we need to acquire our land legally, and how it is necessary to ensure that payment, you complete your payment even before you do any development. Another critical thing you did mention was the issue of zoning. So I would like to ask, Mr. Chudi, I want to ask you, I would like you to zone in on two things before we take those questions. The first thing has to do with when compliance. You've talked about where we don't keep to the regulations, where people don't do the right thing. So should we have people who have done all the necessary things, and now the government is coming in to say, yes, maybe because of overriding public interest, the government is saying we want to take in this project or this development. What would you advise people to do? People who already complied with all of those things, as to just listening to what people are saying in terms of, oh, we want to demolish your property, everybody goes and shout on the paper and all that. What would you say to people who
all right, so
have...
let me just quickly respond to that. In terms of, you have followed all the planning regulations, you have your title documents, and the government decides to take your property. Remember that the word is overriding public interest. If you look at the land use decree section, I think it's 22, there's a major word there, overriding public interest. So it is in the greater interest of the common public that your property will be acquired. There's really not much you can do about it if that arises. The key thing, as I was saying in my conclusion, is that if you have your planning permit and you have your title document, you will be fully compensated. You will be paid adequate compensation for that property. I think that is the key thing. You will not be able to stand on the path of progress in terms of the state, in terms of the country. You'll not be able to, your property will not be able to stand on the path of progress, on the path of development. But the key thing is that if and when that situation arises, you will be entitled to full compensation because you have title documents, you have your approved building plan. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The other question there are two questions already, about 4 questions. The other question I want you to weigh in is the issue of the regulatory authorities. These administrative bottlenecks, you have to go from one place to the other, it's taking you ages for you to get a particular permit and all that. And that somehow, it affects the development and maybe by extension, the provision of maybe if we're talking about housing now, it affects it. What would you say to that in terms of these administrative bottlenecks? You go through this, go through that. Why can't we, is there a possibility to have a one-stop shop so that these things are done so that people can just get this approval and get to develop as soon as possible? Is that a possibility,
Yeah,
sir?
there is a possibility. And again, I use Lagos State as an example. We were at the launch of the e-portal in January for Lagos State. They launched an e-portal. On that e-portal, you can sit down in the comfort of your home and send in all your building drawings and everything for your approval. It can actually be done over the portal. You don't need to go to the office. So Lagos State has taken the lead in that. They've taken the lead. You don't need to be physically present. Everything can be put together and submitted through that e-portal for approval. It's also good that you have said this. One of the major problems that people have identified in terms of obtaining approvals, or in terms of the problem with obtaining approvals, is the large number of documentation and stuff that needs to be submitted. And one of the suggestions that we have made and will continue to be made to the government, the various, is a one-stop shop, just a single one-stop shop. One office, the survey plan, building approval, building control, material testing, physical planning, one office. When you get to that office, they will take everything from you and deal with it. So you don't have to go to multiple offices and dealing with multiple agencies. Thank you.
All right, so let's begin to go into the questions. We have about 4 questions here. Thank you, Deborah, for this question. Before I read the question, please, again, if you want to make comments, you can please, by show of hand, we'll probably promote you to panelists and allow you. So, sir, the first question from Deborah here is saying, good afternoon, sir. I have a question. And it says, after getting the building approval, stated piling foundation, and the developer did sand filling and leave it for a while, and did soil test, which recommended raft. I want to ask if there's any department in building approval office to rectify the new changes. Did you pick that, sir?
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm. Once there are changes in your building approval, or if there are changes in your building, the truth is that you have to go back to building approval to inform them. Remember also that they have oversight on the development. So if there are changes that have taken place or take place after you have obtained some of these approvals, it's proper, it's part of the regulatory process. You must go back and inform them so that it can be incorporated into everything that they're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Now, the other question?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, if she has any other, she'll probably make the comment. The other question is coming from Anonymous, who says, hello, is C of O a collective term for different interest in land, e.g., freehold interest, leasehold interest, etc.?
A C of O is not a collective. A C of O just gives you title for 99 years. And a certificate of occupancy takes off or started, the certificate of occupancy started from the Land Use Decree of Land Use Act of 1979. Before that, there was the freehold interest. Before that, there was the freehold interest. There's a transaction that I'm currently on right now where the title is actually for 999 years. And the owners were saying, the buyer was saying that he wanted to go to Lagos State to get a 99-year interest. And I said, well, it was up to him. As far as I'm concerned, you have a 999-year interest. It's still as good and possibly even better than a 99-year interest. So just depending, there's nothing, a certificate of occupancy only covers your interest for 99 years, after which it goes back to the government or you renew it. There are other bits of it, the deed of assignment, the governor's consent, and so on. So these all come or derive from the certificate of occupancy. When there's a transaction on the land, then the person who you have bought from assigns, that's why it's called the deed of assignment. The person who you have bought from assigns his unexhausted interest to you as the new buyer. And that's when it becomes a deed of assignment. And then you obtain the governor's consent to that transaction. So these are some of the explanations of those terminologies that we hear.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so Titilayo is thanking you for the insightful presentation. Thank you, Titilayo. So this other question is coming from Ganiyu Fajimi. He's saying, while obtaining necessary documents to enable you approach the authority for permit, is EIA compulsory for all type of projects, or is it only meant for high-rise building or specialized property?
You need to get a permit for every kind of project that you want to do. You need to get a permit. We talked about the reason for that permit. Part of the reason to comply also means that the authorities need to know what is coming into that neighborhood. These same authorities will use your information and data to determine the kind of services, the kind of infrastructure that need to be provided in that area. People should actually remember that it is this information that even helps the government determine where schools will be, where a hospital will be, where a police station would be. You know, these are for planning purposes. These are actually the reasons why these planning approvals and permits are given, because then they enable the government work out how a neighborhood is going to turn out and what services and infrastructure need to be put in. Of course, the supervision or the requirements to get approval for a bungalow is very different for the process. The process is different. It's very different if you were getting approval for a 20-story building. The requirements are very different. It will be a lot more stringent and so on. But if it's a bungalow, it will be much easier to get that approval. Thank you.
So does it mean that you need maybe environmental impact assessment for all kind of projects?
I think the bigger the project, the more imperative that an environmental impact assessment becomes. I'm sure that you will not need an environmental impact assessment for a 3-bedroom bungalow. It's very doubtful. But yes, if you were doing a project, if you were doing, I mentioned something about the event center, for example, you would need an environmental impact analysis. If you were doing a club, you're doing a club, a nightclub, for example, you would need an environmental impact assessment because your neighbors and so on, you need to know how that nightclub would impact on them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I guess exactly that's what the question was saying. I mean, talking about asking if it for specialized property. I think you've clarified that properly. So the other person talked about. I'm trying to see if we have anybody who wants to ask any direct question. I've not seen any. So let me just take, I mean, one or two more. Then we'll begin. We'll wrap up. You talked about the Lagos State Governor coming to talk about how a whole lot of properties in Lagos don't have building approval. So the other question I want you to weigh in on is this issue of awareness. Now, there's no ignorance, is not, if you don't know, it's not the government's fault, but what do you think about awareness? Ensuring that people are, of course, this is one of the things we're actually doing now for the professionals and for people who are in on this call. But what should the government be doing with regards to awareness so that people begin to do the right and the necessary things, sir?
Okay. These are personal views, but again, they have been one way or the other passed down to those in government in the past. The first thing that I will honestly say, and which many of us in practice know, is that the government and their regulatory bodies and agencies are very overwhelmed. They do not have the resources nor the manpower to be able to oversee or have oversight over development that is going on in Lagos, in any state, they do not have the resources, they do not have the manpower to be able to have an oversight over every estate development that is going on. So it's obvious that they are overwhelmed. The question now would be, what are we doing in terms of awareness? Yes, the government needs to come out and continue to educate people. That's part of what this webinar is about. This is our own initiative and also part of what we do to help the professionals and so on. But the government needs to be really, really, really proactive in terms of awareness. Radio advertisements, radio programs on the television, community education, and so on and so forth. There's so much to be done. I keep saying that many people don't even know that these things exist. Many people don't know about the Lagos State Material Testing Laboratory. The lab scar people think that their job is just to go and demolish. No, they're supposed to, before anything, before you move to your site, they're supposed to give you a permit. They're supposed to give you a letter confirming that you can move to your site. So going forward, one of the suggestions that we have made in the past is that the government should actually involve the private sector in this building oversight, in development, real estate development oversight. They should involve the private sector. There are lots of town planning professionals. There are a lot of architects, there are a lot of engineers who are running private practices that can be involved. An arrangement that is a win-win situation for the professionals and the government can be reached, where they themselves are offering these services for professional fees to be the government, overseeing a lot of these developments. And one of the reasons why it will work is because their professional integrity and license will be at stake. If I am supervising a site and I have been telling you that the site, oh, no problem at all, the site has met all the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, there are no problems. And then 6 months later, the place collapses. Or someday we find that they were building on the setback or they were building on a drainage channel. Then I have every right to be professionally dealt with, and maybe even my license or practice withdrawn. So this is something that the government should look into, involving professionals in the private sector in the supervision and oversight of building developments. And then, of course, we know that in terms of awareness, the Lagos State government has given a 90-day amnesty to everybody who has a development now. I think starting from the 1st of April or the 1st of May, you have 90 days to go and obtain your building approval. If you don't have building approval, this is the time to do it. No questions asked, just bring your building, just bring the approval, just bring the drawings as is, and you will pay the necessary, no penalties. They're not even asking for back penalties or whatever. Just bring the drawing as is, and you will be given approval. So that what they're trying to do is to ensure that as many people as possible get this approval. And when this approval is got, then the government has information. They have data that enable them plan for the various neighborhoods. Now, how much publicity has been given to this, I can't say. Maybe because we are in the building sector, so we know. Do the guys in the finance industry know? Do the people in manufacturing know? Do the people in communications know? How many of them know? So I think that I agree with you that there needs to be a lot more awareness. For this kind of thing, I would have thought that the government would spend maybe 3 months even just giving it publicity in the papers and the press, on billboards, going from community to community, speaking to landlord-resident associations all over Lagos State, creating serious awareness for this kind of amnesty. And it's still not too late. Even if it has started, we probably have another 60 to 75 days to go. And if it hasn't started, then there's still 90 days to go. But it's important that at the end of the day, people as much as possible try to get their building approval and permits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We have one more question. I was going to ask another last question from you, just to see your thinking about that direction, about a particular national development. But let's take this question. Okay, so Ogechi, you say, please, you will definitely get the recording. If you leave your email address, when it's ready, we're going to send that to you. This person is asking, Ayomidu Aluko is saying, what is the Nigerian Institution of Estate Surveyors and Valuers doing in terms of making estate surveyors major in property development, as against what obtains that non-estate surveyors are the main players in this ever-active sphere of estate surveying and practice?
That's a question that, let me just say it this way. Real estate development involves a lot of capital. It's not the Nigerian Institution of Estate Surveyors and Valuers has no business. It's a personal initiative. What will happen is that we will offer our services to developers. The developer needs us. We need to do feasibility and viability proposals for them, feasibility and viability studies for them. They need us. They need information in terms of what these properties go for. They need information in terms of the land values, and so on. But I'm not sure that the institution as a regulatory body or as an association can push its members into real estate development. I don't think that is their business or one of their mandates. Estate surveyors and valuers are in the practice. What I would suggest, or what has been suggested in the past, is that rather than leave the non-professionals and businessmen who are doing these developments now, what has been suggested in the past is that surveyors should come together, put money together, and start off projects of their own. You don't need to build 50 houses at one go. You can start off with 2 wings of duplex. If 3-4 surveyors come together and are able to fund it, it's a start, and grow the development process or industry from there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Okay, so I think the last question I took was actually from Mr. Kehinde Odebode, and he actually said, you had actually dealt with it earlier on. He said, my earlier question is in line with what Mr. Chudi just emphasized a moment ago. When estate surveyors engage more in property development, because they are properly regulated, knowing that their professional competence and practice is at stake. I think here you already That is actually emphasizing that you did mention that earlier on. Femi Rufus, we are going to send you the recording. Just I'm sure the backend can take your email address as you just send it right now. Thank you very much for that. So, sir, as we just want to close, one more thing okay, I'm trying to look if there's any other question. Okay, so this person is also saying, good afternoon, sir. Permit me to appreciate you so far on your analysis, sir. Please, sir, what can the government do to reduce long period of approval for C of O? Do you want to quickly take that before I ask the last question?
Yeah, the long period of approval of C of O. Again, Lagos State will tell you that you can obtain your C of O in 30 days. The question is, when people submit these documents, do they go back? The truth is that the process of obtaining that C of O in Lagos State does not quite change. One of the problems is that when people submit these documents, the follow-up becomes a problem. Do they go back to check whether there are questions, whether there are issues on the file? And again, the e-portal that was launched in January still can be used for application for your C of O. That same e-portal is available. You can submit all your documents through that e-portal to obtain your C of O. The point about reducing the time was actually one of continuous engagement. It's one of continuous engagement with the relevant authorities, especially in Lagos State, who are very passionate about this. It's one of continuous engagement. If you know that there are areas that you have suffered delay and so on, you can actually engage them in the land registry. You can engage the PAMSEC, you can engage the director of land, you can engage the director of title. One thing about Lagos, excuse me, one thing about Lagos State, and I mean, we say this with all restraint, is that they are listening. So it's always about continuous engagement. Lagos State will tell you that land is their oil, is their gold. So they are ready to do anything possible to make sure that they get the best of it. And getting the best of it includes the fact that when people transact on land, they make it easy for them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have 3 other comments, but again, they are not, I'll just, okay. We'll send Angela at the back, about 4 of them. Angela, please, can you look at the back and look at those email addresses? They're asking for the recording, a whole lot of people. Please, the back end, can you just try and take the email addresses? Someone is saying here, I don't understand what he's asking, but he's asking, are they taking into consideration the new property transaction model at the Lagos State Land Registry? I don't know if you understand what that is, but I don't really pick this. Are they taking into consideration the new property transaction model at the Lagos State Land Registry? I don't really get this. But again, let me, I'm seeing quite, so please just forgive me, there are quite a whole lot. Okay, all these are email addresses for the recordings. Thank you very much. So, sir, as we wrap up and before my final closing, we can't definitely have you on this platform, and I will not want to ask this question. I want to pick on your wealth of experience and understanding on this subject. You talked about Fort Mainland Bridge earlier on. Now the government is talking about the Coastal Road. What do you think about this project? And what should we be thinking in terms of the impact of this project on real estate development? I want you to weigh in on that as we begin to wrap up.
The Coastal Road and the Fort Mainland Bridge will only serve to open up Lagos. I mean, every time that there's new infrastructure, it increases accessibility, it eases accessibility, it increases accessibility. The part of real estate is that when it eases accessibility and increases accessibility, real estate values will move up. So this is a time for those who are speculators, for those who advise clients, for those who are looking for where to invest. This is a time to look at the Coastal Road corridor and the Fourth Mainland Bridge corridor, this is the time to look at them and see how you can take positions on plots of land. Real estate is real estate. All over the world, when there is new infrastructure, values move up. Thank you.
Okay, sir, we have to still drag a bit. I've seen someone who wants to ask a question. Angela, can you quickly bring, if this person can do this in 1 minute, please, a whole lot of, please, the back end, see all of the email addresses that are being dropped, please. I want you to ensure you look at that. But please, Angela, can you bring up, I can see Sandra Ojiako. Can you bring her up? Let's hear a comment if she can do that in 1 minute so that we can begin to, okay, good. Sandra, you have the floor. Can you unmute yourself and please ask your question or make your comment quickly? Thank you. Sandra, please unmute yourself. Okay, I can't unmute yourself. You're still muted. Hello, Sandra. Can you unmute yourself? You're already promoted to the good. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I think she's not okay. I think we have to probably just I wish she can actually unmute herself and ask a question, but she's not doing that. Okay, so that's fine. So right about now, Mr. Chidi, thank you so very much for doing this with us. Thank you for sharing your understanding on this subject topic, and we are grateful for having you, and we always come back calling, I mean, to get to learn on other topical issues. Once again, I want to thank everybody who have been on this call, on this webinar. It's been, I mean, I'm sure you can also agree with me that it's been a wonderful time to spend here. So like everyone who had actually asked for the recording, your email is being harvested by the back end. We are going to ensure we send the recording, not just the recording, we could also send you the slides so that you can also have them for your use. And you may want to also stay back a bit to see some of our property for listing before you sign off. Once again, this webinar is brought to you by Uboseli and Company. You can reach us anytime, and we're willing to take your inquiries, we're willing to take your questions, we're willing to take your feedback, and we want to thank you greatly for doing this with us in the month of April. And I want to assure you that another session awaits you in the month of May, and it's going to be a wonderful time. Mr. Chudi, thank you so very much. We are grateful, and we pray that God continue to bless you, and we ask that everyone have a wonderful and beautiful afternoon. Bye for now. So this webinar is brought to a close, but you can listen to some of our properties that we have for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
All right, so, yes. Angela, please make sure you take all the email addresses so that you can actually send. I can see a whole lot of email addresses here. Please take all the email addresses so that we can send this email to people. Thank you.